Rowena, you've grown up with Edith Holden as part of your life, all your life. Tell me, what relation is she of yours?
Well, she's only related by marriage, but she was married to my grandfather's brother.
But her personal effects and obviously her diary, that passed down through your line of the family, through to your mother, I believe?
Yes. Edith and Ernest had no children, and when Ernest died after Edith, the book went to his brother, Fred, who's my grandfather, and my mother was an only child, so it came down to me.
And is it something that you remember from your childhood?
I do, vividly, because my mother and I did nature walks, and we always had dogs, and we always had little nature tables, and it was open, and we used to look at the different times of the year and go and try and find things.
Now, you're an artist yourself. Did the diary and the artwork of Edith Holden influence you in any way?
I wouldn't say it influenced me. It was something that was always there, and I didn't sort of question it. I didn't believe it was anything particularly special. It was just there, and I loved it.
Why did you love it?
I think it was because it was finished, and everything I seemed to start, my diaries and things like that, I sort of made a big start in January, and then it sort of petered out. But I was always very impressed that it was complete.
And so, when did you think of taking it to be published?
I think initially I talked to my mother about how her paintings would translate very well onto fabrics. So it was sort of thinking of merchandising before we'd thought about publishing it as a book, because things hadn't been published like that as a facsimile before. So I hadn't really thought about that. But then I met Richard Webb of Webb and Bauer, and he was a packaging company, so he packaged books and then sold them to other publishers, because they were quite a small company at the time.
Now, by packaging, you mean that he basically made prototype books, which then he approached other publishers with?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, and he was based not far from you, I think.
Well, I was at art college at the time in Exeter. I was doing my degree, and they lived just down the road, and I'd met his wife at a party, and I'd said, well, I have a book that you might be interested in looking at, just because I was interested in their opinion of it. So I went and showed them the book.
And they agreed to publish it, and they did it in association with a London publisher called Michael Joseph.
Yes, I think it took quite a while before anyone became interested, almost a year, because it was going to be something quite different to try and interpret the book as it was. And they then went to Montadori in Italy and had it, who were very good at facsimile printing at the time.
When it was published, it became a publishing phenomenon, didn't it, quite quickly?
Yes, it was. It wasn't until I saw the whole of Hatchard's bookshop in London. I'd never seen the front window with just one book in it, just the whole window. And foils, and there were piles of them. And it suddenly became very exciting. But I always assumed most books were very, sold that well. Because I wasn't in publishing, it didn't occur to me that other books didn't sell that well.
And it went into the Sunday Times bestseller list, yes, where it stayed for so long. It went into the Guinness Book of Records.
Yeah, yes.
That must have been very exciting for you to see all that.
It was, but I had enormous confidence in it because I loved it. So it didn't occur to me that anyone else wouldn't.
And when did the merchandising start? Was that soon after it was published?
Yes, I think the first things we did were cards. And that's something my mother and I had talked about before we'd even shown it to Webenbauer. We just thought how there were so many beautiful little illustrations in the book that they would look really nice as cards.
And that was with Elgin Court, I think.
Yeah, yes.
What, in all the merchandise that was produced, what was your favourite product?
I think the favourite thing might not be a product so much, was a rose was produced, and it was called Edith Holden, and it was a sort of sepia colour, and that was quite special.
Did you find the success of the merchandise overwhelming at all? Because it went into kitchens and ceramics and fabrics and just everything you can possibly think of.
I think because I wasn't part of the industry to start off with, I had nothing to gauge it against, and I just assumed it would be successful. I know it seems rather strange, but it just didn't occur to me that it wouldn't be. So it didn't surprise me, no.
Now, Edith Holden died a long time before you were born. In fact, your mother was very young when she died. So have you discovered a lot about her and her life since this became such a phenomenon?
Yes, I mean, it's been quite difficult, but we have what my grandmother has said about her. I know that she was thought of very fondly, and my mother remembers, although it probably would have been after she died, going to see Ernest and saying how beautiful their room was, one of the rooms in the house, because it had little still lives in the corners, so Ernest, being a sculptor, liked to have things that he could look at. And so I should imagine the two of them had must have been a lovely house with them both in.
She was born in 1871, so she was very much of the Victorian period. Was she a typical Victorian?
I don't think she was. I think she was well educated, and she seems to have spent most of her time on her bike whizzing around the countryside on her own, which was wasn't typical then. And she went off up to Scotland to go on a course to learn how to paint, and although her father accompanied her up there, she was left there for almost a year, and so it must have been interesting times for them, as it was for everyone really. A lot of industry starting up at that time.
She married Ernest, who was a sculptor, as you said. Were they part of an artistic set?
Well, I should imagine so, because Ernest was at the Royal College under Edward Lanterry, who was very well known at the time. He specialised in animal sculpture, and went on after he came out of college to work for Countess Glecken at St James's Palace, and helped her because she was a very well-known sculptress, as was her father. And
they lived, where in London did they live?
In Chelsea.
Which is was at a time quite an artistic area.
Yes, absolutely, yes. So she must have been part of and met a lot of different people at the time. So very different from her country life when she married Ernest.
Now, there was, after the original book had been published, a second diary appeared, didn't it?
Yes, a family called the Whites. I believe they bought it in a jumble sale with bits of china, and then one of their children took it into school or something, and someone said, I know who's done that. And so the story goes, they approached Webenbauer again, and it was a similar diary, but done the year before. And wasn't done to such a
finished degree? Or?
Yes, finished, and the lettering was hand done. Not, I mean, in italics, not a font that everyone knows now. I think it was sort of working up to doing the one that is now called The Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady, because she was teaching in a school in Solihull at the time, and I believe she did it to show her students sort of nature. And we actually found one of the students, one of the pupils, and she had done similar drawings, and we have those well, someone has those drawings.
So have you been around the places that are shown in the diary? What are they like today? It's over 100 years since the diary was painted.
Well, surprisingly, there are places around that have not changed at all, but obviously the sort of urban sprawl has taken over quite a lot of, especially as she lived in Solihull, which is near Birmingham. So there is obviously a lot of building, but there are beautiful places that she went to which are still beautiful places.
What do you think she would have made of her diary being so popular today? Above all, her diary becoming an e-book.
Well, I've always thought that she'd be rather bemused that a book that she had written to show children how to illustrate and write about nature would suddenly become a bestseller. I think she'd actually, because she was an illustrator at the time of books, she'd be rather upset that her lettering wasn't better, I think. And, if it was going for publication, I think she would have tidied it up a bit. But that's the charm of it.
Is it that which has that make people so fond of it, or are there other aspects that you think have made it last?
It's nostalgic to look back and think that everything was wonderful at a certain period, but it's always interesting to look at a period and see what was happening then, with the weather, with the birds. I mean, it's just interesting.
Rowena Stott, thank you very much.